love that. I think that if I heard it correctly, I heard Tucker say, what happens to the guy in the... And the perfect response, I'll tell you later. That's exactly what we're hoping for. It's exactly, it's tweak the interest, that sort of thing. There's these pieces. This is what life and faith is all about. Missing the boat, or it might have been more aptly tagged, missing the waterfall. And today we conclude our 4-part series on those large, kind of more churchy words called evangelism and discipleship. And we've been talking about those, and get ready. If you've been here all 3 weeks, you know what's coming. Henrietta's going, yep, I know what's coming. And if there's only one thing that you take away from the 4 weeks that we took together, we've spoke it out loud the last 4 weeks together. And this is what I'm hoping. So last week we tried this, and we only had to do it one time because he did such a great job. Everybody just projected, talked about what was going on. So here it is, a little hint. If you haven't been here, just read the words up there. But for the rest of your life, when you hear the word evangelism and you hear the word discipleship, you're going to think connecting the dots. Yes, connecting the dots. And discipleship and evangelism are actually two sides of the same coin. So evangelism is just that opportunity to walk alongside with someone who does not yet know Jesus. And you just connect the dots. And discipleship is when Tucker says, what happens with the guy in the boat? And we walk alongside, and he knows Jesus, and he helps, and he celebrates the supper, and he's part of our family. And you later on go, this is what it's about. Connecting the dots. Connecting the dots. I'm glad that you laughed at that video. And it is rather humorous. But what I want to share with you is that the picture that I've been painting in the last 3 weeks, and I think the biblical picture of what evangelism and discipleship is all about, and especially the journey of being an evangelist or a discipler, which is what we're going to look at today, one who is the one who walks with, Tucker, an evangelist or a discipler, is actually very different than the video that we just saw. In fact, I hope that none of you ever watch that video ever again in terms of your understanding of evangelism. And here's why. Because in that video, the underlying principles are that the man who is asleep in the boat is the one who needs evangelism. And the man who is sitting on the shore is the evangelist. And the man on the shore just kind of looks out and for some reason does not warn the man of the impending waterfall. Now, there's a number of issues with this video, but let me start with 2. The first is, a number of you are fishermen. Some of you have actually taken me out on your boat. Pete, you took me out on your boat before. I am not a fisherman. I've been taking, we have friends of ours that take us sailing in Hamilton. Here is what I know about every single fisherman or woman that I have ever met on this entire earth. They would never allow that to happen. In fact, and this is no indictment on Pete, the exact opposite is often true. If you have ever gone sailing with somebody or on a boat ride with somebody or fishing with somebody, they are so excited to share with you about what fishing or sailing is all about that sometimes it gets to that point of going, whoa, whoa, whoa. There's, the jibe and the this and the that and the sail moves and all that stuff. It makes all sense if you're just like, whoa, whoa, whoa. That scenario would never happen. For somebody who loves canoeing, they would never allow a guy to float along toward the waterfall. That's actually why it makes it humorous. But friends, if that is our picture of evangelism, and if that's the picture that we take and we allow to rest in us, I think this is actually, going back to week one of the reasons why many of us, when we hear the word evangelism, think of it as a dirty word. Because we think evangelism is really about people out there in the world and coming to VBS and maybe kids that are kind of asleep in a boat. And what we need to do is we need to learn how to call out, "Watch out, there's a waterfall coming." And if we can only learn those words, then the boat will come in and everybody will be fine. Friends, the only emotion, the only feeling that we can take from that video for ourselves in terms of evangelism is shame. Is shame. That's the first issue with the video. The second issue is this. It suggests that evangelism happens as someone is approaching impending danger, is approaching a waterfall. That evangelism is something that happens before somebody finds themselves in distress. And the picture that I put up in the first week to describe where evangelism begins is actually when people find themselves in distress. And the same is true with discipleship. I had an amazing experience this week. It became abundantly clear to me one day this week that I do not know fully what I'm doing, how to manage a staff. We now have Kay Marie with us. We have Diana with us. We're incorporating some new software to connect us together. We've got a number of volunteers that are really mobilized. All this stuff is happening. And it became abundantly clear to me that I don't know how to do this. It's no judgments, it's true. But I found myself in distress. And one of you, who is a bit further along the journey of me, who has been managing people for a number of years, I won't give it away because then you know what, you'll know the age and all that kind of stuff, came alongside and basically said, "Jeff, can I walk with you?" And I haven't yet asked this individual, but I will be asking them. I am in distress. Things are going really well, by the way, but I don't know what I'm doing. I've never been trained to do this. All of you are like, wow. It took them 11 years to figure that out. Evangelism and discipleship often happens not when we have been asleep in the canoe, but when we have been paddling and working and trying to figure things out, and the current has been so strong, and it gets to the point where we go over the top of those rapids, and the canoe is broken, and we don't know what to do, and we turn, for some reason, we turn to God. If it's evangelism for the first time or discipleship, we turn to someone else, or God sends someone into our lives, which was step 2 in the second week, and we're looking for a new path through the forest where the path that used to work is not there anymore. And I apologize for blending those metaphors together, but this is what happens. Evangelism and discipleship doesn't happen at those places. Our job is not to stand on the shore and call it, "Watch out, watch out." I'm just going to call "watch out" without the hand gestures for now. Evangelism and discipleship is simply connecting the dots. And as we saw last week, there's those places where we begin to walk together, where we begin to learn some new things. Where as you walk together in those time of distress, or someone walks with you, and imagine this for a minute. Imagine that you have someone in your life, or this might be you, that is struggling with forgiveness and unforgiveness. And eventually what happens with unforgiveness is it ends up hurting you more than others. And life, and it causes you and it moves you into places of distress. And they've invited you to walk along. And then imagine that we gather together and I say, hey, we're going to have a 4-part series on forgiveness. And you go, you know what? We've been walking together, journeying about this. And now there's going to be some times and some spaces where we can learn about what God has to say about forgiveness. This is why we gather on Sunday mornings. This is why we gather at Bible studies. And by the way, where's Julie? Julie, wave your hand for a minute. Burkle? In the nursery. There's a time change for Julie's study. Does somebody else know what the time change was? Yes, it was 10 o'clock. Now it's going to 1 o'clock. If you're part of that study. That's why we gather together, learn about who God is. That's why tomorrow, that's why we've done all this work. This incredible set here. That's why I have these crazy clothes on. Sorry, Jerry. Jerry owns the vest, not the socks. Yeah. And we're going to gather in this place. And you know what? In the next week, as we have the skits and we have the Bible lesson, we have the games, our kids are going to learn, the kids that come here are going to learn about who God is. But friends, here's the biggest issue with that video that we just began with. The video that we began with suggests that evangelism, or being an evangelist, is only about standing on the shore and saying, watch out. And that the journey is over then. The danger is for us to think that this is the journey. That Friday, the journey kind of comes to a close. The danger is for us to think that this is the journey. If I just gather on a Sunday morning and meet with folks and worship God and understand that that is what God wants in life, that's what we need to do. The danger of that video is that it moves to us and it moves us into a place as evangelists and disciplers, that really what we need to do is learn how to call out that bigger, better kind of wake up. And then when that happens, that the rest is just details. The danger is for us to, as the last chorus that we sang in the first song, the danger is that the let it be my life refrain is this or this. But friends, we didn't say let it be my life refrain to come and get other people to join with me on a Sunday morning for an hour and better not be longer than an hour and a half. By the way, I'm the talkative brother. So some of you were wondering if, maybe Irving was a little bit shorter than Pastor Jeff, but I'm the talkative one. It's not, let it be our life refrain. It's not about gathering here, even though this is unimportant. The let it be our life refrain is not, we didn't sing about gathering people into a VBS, which is great and important, and I'm so thankful. I wouldn't be standing up here in this whatever it is, if I didn't think it was unimportant. The let it be our life refrain was followed by this line: to live is Christ and to die is gain. And think about those words for a moment. If you're here and you're a follower of Jesus, you know that these are the words that the Apostle Paul said. If you're here and you have never heard of Jesus before, these are terrifying. Just think about that. Think about if you heard these words for the first time. To live is Christ and to die is gain. How does that work? That is not, watch out. And then followed up with the last two phrases: deny myself, take up my cross, and follow the Son. Friends, the greatest danger of that video that we watched is that we can be moved into a place of thinking evangelism is just how do we figure out to have a bigger, better wake-up call? And I would argue that at least part of the reason why we, as a spiritual family that are the ones to bring the hope and healing through the Father and through Jesus into a world that so desperately needs it, one of the reasons why we are not being very effective is because we don't understand the journey that God is calling us to. And so today I have good news for you. I also have bad news for you. We'll do the bad news first. The bad news is that evangelism and discipleship is not about learning a bigger, better wake-up call. Evangelism and discipleship is far more challenging, and it's far more difficult, and it's far more all-encompassing for the one who walks with and the one who is being walked with. Now, here's the good news. The good news is that evangelism and discipleship is not about learning a bigger, better wake-up call. The good news is that evangelism and discipleship is far more life-giving, far more life-changing, and far more fulfilling for those who walk with and those who are being walked with. And the journey, the purpose that we find is found in the next song that those travelers on the way to Jerusalem sang to each other in the Song of Ascents. We have been looking at the specific section in the book of Psalms. There was 15 psalms that the people would sing as they, for hundreds of years, they would leave their hometowns and they would walk up to Jerusalem 3 times a year, once in the summer for the Feast of Passover, or once in the spring for the Feast of Passover, and once in the summer for the Feast of Pentecost, and then once in the fall for the Feast of Tabernacles. They would all walk together and they would sing these songs back and forth to each other. And we've looked at Psalm 120, which started with the people in distress. Started with that boat going over the waterfall. And what do we do about that? And Psalm 121 was, God will keep you. He'll keep you. He'll guard you. It's the best thing you can do. Talk to Tucker later. God will never leave you or forsake you. Best thing. And then 122 is they stood in the gates and they looked at each other, and those who had traveled before looked at those who were just starting to travel. The disciplers with those who were being discipled, and they said, you know what, it's not the grandeur of Rome. It's not the Pax Romana where you find your hope. No, we're heading on to meet our God who is going to set all things right, to figure that out. And then the next song began with this in Psalm 123, where the author goes, I lift up my eyes to you. He's talking to God, to you who sits on the throne. And they're heading up as a group up to the temple. They're probably getting to there, and together they're calling out, I just lift up my eyes to you who sit enthroned in heaven. And just a little aside, a little helpful thing. If you're wondering what the main point of a piece of a scripture text is about, you usually don't need a seminary degree. Sometimes that can actually make it a little bit more challenging. All you need to do is look for the words that repeat themselves. And if you look at the rest of the verses of verse 2, you'll see that the word eyes is repeated 4 times. I lift up my eyes to you who sit enthroned in heaven. As the eyes of slaves look to the hand of their master, as the eyes of a female slave look at the hand of her mistress, so our eyes look to the Lord our God till he shows us his mercy. Now, a little cultural context is needed here. This is where seminary education is helpful. In that culture and in that day, when we think of slaves, we think of the atrocities that happened in our country, the enslavement of First Nations people, the enslavement of those who were put on boats and brought from Africa, and just all the awful things. In that culture, slavery was very different. Slavery was actually something that was helpful for people. in certain contexts. So if you're really poor in our culture, you can go and you can talk to Al, get some food at the caring cupboard. You can go chat with, if you're homeless, you can chat with Deborah, the Indwell help. And there's other places. There wasn't any of that in that culture. If you were poor and had no food, you had one option. And that was, you could go and become a slave. You could go to somebody that you trusted, a larger landowner, somebody who was benevolent, and say to them, I will become your slave. And what this individual, what he would give to you, is he would give you food on your plate and a place to live, those basic necessities of life. And what you would do is you would help to work in the fields and bring the crops in and do those pieces. And in that culture, in that day, this was a positive arrangement. Friends, remember, they have just stood at the gate. And they're walking together, and chances are there are masters and slaves that are walking together. And the slaves are looking to their benevolent masters. By the way, this would have been a huge time of internal introspection for the masters. As 3 times a year, their slaves are looking up to them and saying, as they look up to me, so they're going to understand God as they understand the way that I deal with them. They're walking, they're in the gates, and the slaves are, as the eyes of the slaves look to the hand of their master. It's this positive thing. As I have gotten help in the midst of my time of poverty, as the eyes of the female slave look to the hand of their mistress. Mistress, again, is a positive word. This is all positive. So our eyes look to the Lord our God till he shows us mercy. And the question for us here is, so what does he need to show us mercy for? Maybe it is really about, being asleep in the canoe and the waterfall is, going to hell after you die. And maybe it is, it talks about, I look to you who sits enthroned on heaven. Maybe it really is about just getting somebody to pray a prayer and come here. And then at the end of their life, then they get to go to heaven when they die. But when you continue reading, you see the plea for mercy 3 times. Till the Lord grants us mercy. Have mercy on us, Lord. Have mercy on us. Why? For we have endured no end of contempt. He's not talking about some time off in the future. He's not talking about falling off a waterfall at some point. It's my boat has fallen off. My current way of life is not working. For we have endured no end of contempt, no end of ridicule from the arrogant, no end of contempt from the proud. One of the things that I loved about these travelers on the way? Man, were they honest. They were honest about the way that life just turns terrible sometimes. And they're heading up there. Slaves and masters, hopefully, intended to be benevolent to each other, heading up there, looking 3 times a year, being honest about the fact that this reality can happen to even the greatest of those who follow God. I think this would have been one of those times when they were walking along, just like at the end of Psalm 121, where they would have walked in silence, at least for a short time. And they would have pondered the Roman occupation. And they would have pondered the hardship that was a part of their lives. And they would have pondered the challenges. And it would have been up to those who had taken the journey the longest to move them into Psalm 124. Shameless plug for next week. But friends, the final step, if we are going to walk with, and for the rest of our time, I want to talk specifically to those who are called to be evangelists or disciplers. So if you're saying and you're going, I want somebody to walk with me, this is what they're going to offer you. And if somebody comes alongside and says, I'm going to walk with you, and I think, God's called me to walk with you, this is what they are going to offer to you. And what I need to do is I need to begin with an apology. And the apology is this. I had completely missed this reality. And I did not see this arc throughout the Scripture until our second day in Egypt. You see, as we walk and as we read through God's story, if you move along, you see real quickly at the beginning, it'll start with a guy named Abraham. And what does God do? God calls him away from his comfortable life to a land that he does not know. A difficult journey. Then his descendants, his kids, end up in Egypt, and they're enslaved in Egypt. And if you know the story, you know that Moses comes in and he rescues them. And this is the part that I need to apologize for, is that I often thought this was kind of like William Wallace in Braveheart. Moses kind of comes in and he rescues them, and you know what? Then they're in this deep oppression one day, and then the next day they're free. That's not how the journey went at all. Friends, this is a picture of Egypt and Israel in the land when we got there. Or this is a picture of Egypt along the Nile River. This is a picture of farming practices that have been done this way for thousands of years. This is the way they would have farmed the land when the people of Israel were there. The land in Egypt is fertile like nowhere else in the Middle East. And the reason for that is every year the Nile River would flood. And not floods like we're getting in Louisiana now, but it would flood, this nice, gentle flood. It would kind of come over and it would wash away all the toxins, and it would wash in all this silt and minerals. It was over 9 feet of topsoil. For thousands of years of the Nile doing this every year. There's 3 seasons in Egypt: inundation, planting, and harvest. We got there in the harvest season. It's incredibly fertile land. But this is the next picture, and what I want you to notice is the fertile land and what is on the other side. You see, the Nile River kind of goes like this, and it's got the flat land, it's fertile here, and then the wilderness begins. And the land that Moses called his people to and said, this is the land I'm going to take you into, looked like this. And the people did not have packs with hoses where they could drink their water and tilly hats and all of those things with them. And they didn't have an air-conditioned bus that they could get back on into that time. Moses called them from a fertile land into the wilderness. Just saying, I will never give those Israelite people a hard time for grumbling ever again. I can tell you there were times where George would stop the tour bus about a kilometer away from where we had to our destination from that time, and would invite us to walk through this wilderness to experience what it would have been like. I can tell you we as a group of pastors and spouses did not nearly have the backbone that those people in the wilderness did for 40 years. Friends, for those children that gather here in VBS, and for all of us, the journey of life and faith with God means that there will be times in the desert. There will be times where we will cry out, have mercy on us, Lord, have mercy on us, for we have endured no end of contempt. There's no end of ridicule from the arrogant and contempt from the proud. There will be times, whether we are the best Jesus follower there ever was or knew nothing of Jesus or anywhere in between, where the boat will fall over the waterfall and it will be crushed and we will have nowhere to turn. This is the journey that we are inviting people. This is the journey that Jesus himself walked. He's baptized in the Jordan River. He comes out of the Jordan River. He hears the heavens are open. God pours his blessing upon him. Then what does the Spirit do? 40 days in the desert alone. Friends, the journey of life and faith with God is the journey that Jesus described with us. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me. The journey with life and God, we're going to have a ton of fun this week, but you know what? It is not always fun. It is not always amazing. There are times where life is incredibly difficult, and there are times where it's incredibly difficult because of who we are. But these are the moments where you as an evangelist and you as a discipler are able to move into these spaces and engage the questions that we should be asking. We shouldn't be asking, how can I do a bigger, better wake-up call? Some of the questions that we should be asking is, why is the journey like this? Did God not want Abraham to have any fun with his family that he moved him out of the place? Did Moses just go, you know what, want the people just to be miserable? Was that the point? Did the Holy Spirit just want Jesus to just, you know what, everybody else has got to experience terrible life. You got it too. And so I'm going to, move into, why? Friends, a little bit later on, Jesus would describe the reality of life for each one of us. He would say that each one of us in our lives experience thieves that steal and kill and destroy. And some of the greatest thieves that we will experience in life are in those places where the land is so fertile, but we're enslaved. And it's killing us. There's only one way to be freed from the thieves in our lives, and that is to walk through the desert. To begin to try to live life differently. There's only one way to move into that place of transformation, and that is to do the hard work of learning in the desert. Friends, our jobs as evangelists and disciplers when we're walking alongside folks, our job is to come alongside and say, this is not the final step. In those places where life is difficult and challenging, as that more senior leader would go, but God is good. Psalm 124 comes after 123. Just like Jesus did, he said, there is a thief that has come only to kill and steal and destroy, but I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. And Jesus spoke those words, and then he lived those words. He walked through the deepest, darkest desert in order to offer us new life on the other side. Because here, when we look at the arc of the journey begins in a place where we're in a fertile land. It's good, we have some things, but it does not fulfill. And God calls us and moves us into a place, often through distress, a desert time. Why? Because he just wants us to have no fun? Because it's awful? No, because this is the land on the other side. And this is a picture of the Sea of Galilee. And this is where the people eventually ended up. There's lessons that he needed to learn in those difficult times. It was on this place, on this very hill where tradition has it that Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount. Where Jesus gave his greatest teachings. And Jesus would have been standing there in the place where George is in the blue, he was our guide. He would have been standing facing the disciples. The disciples would have been looking out onto the Sea of Galilee. On the left-hand side was the Decapolis, the 10 cities that we talked about. The ones that had said, you know what, God is dead. God does not need to be a part of your life. God is the Pax Romana. Humanity can do that. We don't need gates we're so strong, we don't need gates to protect our cities. That was on this side. And Jesus was giving and saying, you are going to be the people that are going to go and show them what true life is really about. And their life is going to get harder before it gets better. And on the right-hand side, that's where the religious folks were. The ones who thought, if I could just follow all the rules, then I can meet God. It was at this place, looking out into that environment, where Jesus gave his greatest teachings. And friends, you could take any one of Jesus' teachings and put it through this lens, I want to talk a little bit about forgiveness, because 2/3 of Jesus' teaching were about forgiveness. If we live with unforgiveness, doesn't matter who we are, if we live with unforgiveness in our heart, eventually it will come back to bite us. We will eventually we will find ourselves in distress. And the beautiful part is that God promises not to leave us alone. He promises to send someone alongside to go, you know what? I'll walk with you. And God will never leave you. He'll never leave you. But if we are going to learn how to live and how to do forgiveness, it's going to take some time walking through a desert. You don't just learn how to move from unforgiveness to forgiveness like that. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes questions. And here's the reality. For any of Jesus' teachings about forgiveness, about living a simple life, about being nonviolent, about loving your enemies, any one of those, the chances of you walking through that desert alone are about as good, and you making it to the other side are about as good as somebody walking through the deserts that we did on their own. Friends, the journey of evangelism and discipleship is really all about walking with and coming alongside someone who has found themselves in a place of distress, where someone whose boat has gone over the waterfall and is a place going, will you help me? And that may be some of the kids that we meet in the next week. And the question that we need to ask ourselves as family is, how are we going to come alongside and answer the questions? When the kids wonder about the experience that they are having in life and a good God who loves them, are we simply going to have nice songs that are fun and great and the actions are good and that's excellent? It's all important. But is that going to be the only message that we are going to give? Friends, we're at the end of our series, Connecting the Dots. And in a moment, we're going to close with the video that we began with, because I think that's a much better video to take with you as you think about what does it mean to do evangelism or discipleship. But here's the steps. The journey begins with someone in distress, either you or someone else. And the next step in the journey is God connecting. Someone walking alongside saying, God will be with you, and I'll be with you wherever we go. It's a beautiful part about being parents and grandparents. And then the third step is to move into spaces like this where we can learn about what is life with God really like. Where we can go to Egypt and experience the fertile land and the wilderness and go, whoa. The fourth step is about honest expectations. Getting rid of the thieves that steal and kill and destroy. Sometimes take a lifetime. But what an incredible journey. The last thought I want to leave you with is this thought. You're not simply a greenhouse operator. You're not simply a greenhouse builder. You're not simply a worship leader. You're not simply a Bible translator. You don't simply install kitchen counters. You're not simply an accountant. You're not simply a farrier. You're so much more than that. As we watch this video that we began with, I would invite you to think, who is it in your life that God is inviting you to walk with? Jamie, if you can play the video.
I'm just a florist. Got a small shop. Nothing special. Silly way to spend your life, I guess. Fussing with a bunch of flowers. Sometimes I wish I was good at something else. I don't know, a doctor or a missionary, someone who really helps people. But I do love flowers. Always had a knack for it. So I do my best to make them beautiful for people. But I know flowers can't change the world. I know I don't make much of a difference. I'm just a florist. I'm just a florist.